back tension is one of the most talked about subjects in recurve archery and often touted as this magical kind of cure-all for all technique errors. But it's not that simple. I'm Ash from OnlineArcheryAcademy.com, and today I'm going to explain by the end of this video why thinking about back tension and trying to create it can often cause you more problems and what you can focus on instead. As a brief recap, the idea of back tension is that you create this tension in your back to pull the bow, hold when you're at full draw, and then also expand and then release using this tension that you've created in your back around here, rather than using the tension, say for example, in your bicep, in your arm, in your forearm, the front of the shoulder. It's using and creating that tension on the back. So why do I have an issue with this, and what are the main problems that this causes? There are three main things here. The first thing is that it's ignoring the fundamentals. I'll get into that a little bit later. The second thing is that it's focusing on muscles rather than movement. And then the third thing is that it's creating unnecessary and often unwanted tension. Not always, but a lot of the time. So now let's break these points down and give you a bit more info. So the biggest issue I have with thinking and creating back tension, as they call it, is that it's ignoring the fundamentals, like I said about. So what I mean by this is, if you're in the wrong position, you can't create back tension and you can't manipulate this in a way that's actually going to be helpful. And it often leads loads of archers astray because they're focusing on completely the wrong things. They're trying to run before they can walk. So let's take an example. Have a look at this video kind of overlay here, and you can see in this example that this position, when I've reached here, what some people would call full draw, but when I've reached anchor here, this position is almost impossible to create back tension from. If in this position, so say for example, my elbow is out, the anchor is wrong, the shoulder blade is not fully round to the spine, in this position, I can try and create back tension. I can be here, and I can try and, if I turn around, I can try and feel the shoulder blade here and create some tension. But at the end of the day, I'm in the wrong position. I can try and create tension, but it's not putting me in the right place, and this tension is not going to be optimal because it's just the physics of where you are lined up and the forces that are going through. If you imagine someone doing a row in the gym, which is also a back exercise obviously, if they're trying to row, and I'll turn around for this, if they're trying to row and they're trying to use their shoulder blade here, if the shoulder blade is out like this and they're trying to row, it's almost impossible to use the correct muscles and create the correct tension in that example because they're in the wrong place and the movement is there. So this is my main issue, is that a lot of archers that might have their alignment is off, maybe their elbow, the draw elbow is out of line, maybe their draw scapula has not come around fully to the spine, which all three of these things were in that example I showed you. A lot of these archers will then say, okay, I need to create back tension. So they just create back tension in the wrong position, and all it leads them to do is have more tension in the shot and then lead to more risk of injury as well. So it's not the way forward for that. Focusing on the positioning is the first thing, and I'll get into that a little bit more towards the end of the video in terms of how you can work on that. But that's the first point there. The second point, this is one that I've talked about before, is when you're focusing on muscles rather than movement, it's much more confusing for your brain and it's much harder to learn, and it's too complex. Think about it simply. If you're going to go to the gym and someone's saying to do a bicep curl, are you going to think about, you've got that weight, are you going to think about, okay, I need to contract the bicep, relax the tricep, make sure I'm not using the muscles in the shoulders too much, all of this stuff? Or are you going to think, I need to move the weight from here to here, and then just move your arm to do that? You're obviously going to think about the second one. It's much more simple. Your brain understands movement of bones rather than trying to create tension in the muscles. It's much more simple and easy for your brain to understand. So this is why I'd strongly encourage you to think in this way rather than creating that tension. And this is a key thing. Once you get really advanced, then maybe you can create and start feeling some specific tension in areas of your muscles, but that's once you've got into that correct position, like I mentioned in point number one. You can't try and do that when you're in the wrong position and you don't have the movement yet. That's really, really key. And taking it back to that bodybuilding or the gym analogy of the bicep curl, once you're really good at the movement of the bicep curl, the weight is low enough, you've got good technique and good movement. Some bodybuilders, for example, will focus on specific feelings in the muscles, but that's definitely more of an advanced technique. So it's not suitable for everyone, especially if the basic movement isn't there. Now the third point is about unneeded and unwanted tension. What do I mean by this? In that same example, if someone is out of position and they're trying to create tension, a lot of the time they say, okay, I'm creating back tension, and they really are, but it's not in the right place. You can create back tension in a whole number of ways, not necessarily the right way. So for example, I can be here, I can be out of position, my scapula's not fully to the spine, I can be out of position, and in this position I can create back tension, and all I've created is lots of tension in the upper traps here. It's not what I want. So creating the tension there often leads to a lot of archers, especially if the alignment isn't good, often leads to a lot of archers using the upper traps, creating tension around the neck, hunching the shoulders, all these things that we want to avoid. So for a lot of people, again, it's unwanted and unnecessary. A good kind of point to kind of drive this home a little bit more is there was this interesting study about people were asked to hold their arm out and resist someone pushing their arm down. And there were two groups. One group was told to tense every muscle in their arm and go very, very rigid and resist the person pushing their arm down. Okay, fairly simple, right? The other group was then told to just imagine they're like a tree branch, their arm is a tree branch, keep their arm relaxed, but just visualize that tree branch kind of feeling in their arm and resist the pushing down of their arm as well. The group that focused on the tree sensation, not tensing every muscle, was the one that could resist being pushed down more. So what does that tell you? It tells you that if you're trying really hard to create tension in all these muscles, you're actually being less efficient. You're using so many other muscles that you don't need to use and not using the main big muscles. So in this example, it's much more efficient to focus, like I said before, on the movement and also focus on getting some sort of visualization that I'll talk about later that can help you create that consistently. A brief interlude. If you're finding this video helpful, you'll love my Patreon content and my online video courses. Every week I make a new video, but the fourth video every time is exclusive to only my patrons. You can get access to these videos and loads more exclusive content on patreon.com/Online Archery Academy. As for the courses, these are perfect if you want to take your archery to the next level with fully guided step-by-step video lessons. I made one course for beginners specifically and one for advanced archers specifically. They cover everything you need to know to finally master your technique properly. Go to courses.onlinearcheryacademy.com to learn more and use code YouTube for 10% off at checkout. So what do I recommend rather than trying to create back tension? Number one, focus on movement and positioning, like I said before. Number two is focus on moving your bones, not creating tension in your muscles. And then number three is making sure that when you're shooting, you're using some sort of visualization, like that tree branch analogy I mentioned, to give yourself a consistent way to do what you need to do. Now let's delve a little bit deeper into that. So say you're working on this. A key aspect that you really need to look at is your positioning, like I mentioned before. When you're looking from overhead, you want to check that your front alignment, the line between your draw hand, draw elbow and bow hand pressure point, when you're looking from overhead, that should be as a straight line as possible when viewed from overhead at full draw, and you can see that here. Likewise, your back alignment, the line between your bow hand pressure point, your bow shoulder and your draw shoulder, that should also be a straight line, like in this example. These are key things to look out for. And unlike the kind of, have you created back tension, these are objective. You can clearly see them on a video and there's no hiding from it. You can't say, oh, okay, it feels like it's doing the right thing. It feels kind of good. No, you can see or you cannot see that your alignment is good or not. So this is really, really good. It's nice to have clear objective feedback, and this is also one of the reasons why this is a much better way to do it. The other thing that you can look at is make sure that your draw elbow, when you're drawing here, that your draw elbow is always moving backwards. I made a whole video on this, but essentially when you're coming up and moving around, your draw elbow should continually be moving away from the target and around the body, and there should be no collapse. At the same time, your scapula should be coming around and going towards the spine. So as you can see, when I'm coming round, the elbow is coming round and the scapula is coming round too. And you can also see that in this video here of Trang shooting. You can see as he's drawing into anchor, the scapula comes fully round to the spine and that moves like that. Now, crucially, when this is happening, I mentioned draw elbow, draw scapula and alignment. Those three things are really important together. But what's also really important is that your draw elbow movement, your draw hand and your draw scapula, they move as one unit. What I mean by that is, again, if you look from overhead, the speeds of these parts of your shot, the hand, the elbow and the scapula, they're moving at the same speed, moving around the body, as you can see in this example. All three parts are moving in a synchronized way, and that means that when the archer gets to full draw, the hand has reached anchor, the elbow has reached the position of alignment, and the scapula has reached the spine. What you don't want is to try and get the scapula around way too far, way too quickly, and you end up bringing the scapula, say for example like this, bringing the scapula all the way to the spine here. I've not even drawn anything, and then from this position here, I have to just move the hand. That means that you've kind of maxed out the scapula, and then you're just kind of using your arm on that last bit. And if you were to view that from overhead, you just see kind of like this, kind of sideways movement. Likewise, when you're moving the elbow, you want that movement of the elbow, that leading from the elbow, will pull the hand along, and then as you move from the elbow, that will bring the scapula to the spine. So you want that to come around nicely. This is really key. Look at that from overhead, get an overhead view and see how they're moving together. I can't kind of emphasize this enough, really, really key. The final point on this is that when you're looking at your elbow and your scapula, it shouldn't come away. It shouldn't lose direction at any point. I mentioned about the elbow already. The elbow shouldn't collapse forwards. The same is true with your scapula. And this is really common at a few points, namely setup. An archer will come up, set up, collapse forward with the elbow. And when that happens, scapula loses as well. So it's really important not to allow that to happen, to keep that movement in the elbow, keep the scapula moving through. And again, you can see in this example of Trang shooting that the scapula continues moving to the spine, and crucially, from release to follow through, this is absolutely crucial. You maintain that movement of the elbow and the scapula to the spine, and there is no loss of that direction. We don't want to see, really good here, you've come around, you're using your elbow, you're using the muscles of the back, you're moving the scapula towards the spine and then coming off like that when you release. That's what we don't want to see. That will cause an execution error. That's what I call it, is an execution error, the elbow going forwards. That will cause your release to go out, causes a lot of issues, and this is quite a common thing. So this is really, really key to make sure you maintain that movement. If you've not used a shot trainer before, you can use this, and this is a great way to kind of train that movement as well. So that's been a detailed look at back tension and what a better alternative is, rather than trying to create back tension, this kind of subjective thing that doesn't really serve the purpose that it's supposed to do. I definitely encourage you to kind of go away and think about some of these things, check those camera angles, those objective feedback areas, and you'll see how much of an impact that has in your shot. I hope you found this video useful as always. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.